Thank you for joining us on the Pwn Free Hustle podcast, where we help entrepreneurs outsmart hackers so they can dominate the hustle. My name is Rob Sinex. In this episode, we're going to talk about the new CMMC requirements for companies that want to get into the DoD contracting space. We're going to talk a little bit about why they're important and what impact we think they might have on the DIB. My guest today, his name is Chip Lilliewood. He is the CEO of Vector Federal Solutions. Really good guy. Had an opportunity to work with him. It was great. Really excited that he's offered to kind of join us today and talk a little bit about CMMC. He's got a background that I always found really impressive, and I think he does a lot of really good work. They work with, like I said, these small government contractors are kind of up and coming. So let's just get into it. So Chip, again, thank you for joining. Do you want to just talk a little bit about your background and kind of what Vector Federal Solutions is all about?
Absolutely, Rob, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It's good to be back hanging out with you. As you mentioned, we worked together previously, and that was one of my fond memories of some really hard work and some really hard times. So I definitely appreciate the opportunity to kind of hang out with you again here in cyberspace. As you mentioned, I'm the CEO of Vector Federal Solutions. We're based out of Quantico, Virginia. Have been in business since 2016. And our background and expertise has really been in helping small and medium businesses navigate that nebulous space, called federal procurement. Our expertise is on both the defense side as well as just the federal contracting side, and we can certainly talk about the nuances between the two of those. But again, what we want to do is help small businesses who are either in the system right now but want to expand, or small or medium businesses that have got a proven commercial solution, and help them bring that solution to the federal government, whether it be the Department of Defense or Department of Homeland Security or anything of that nature. And again, the need is both for companies that are trying to grow, but there's also a serious need on the part of the Department of Defense in particular, but all the federal space, to have new and improved solutions available to them, and making sure that those two groups meet up is really our focus. And again, we've had some pretty good success with that in the past, and we're looking to do that more in the future. So that's really kind of the background.
Yeah. So just a little expanding on that a little bit, right? So what types of things do you help them with? Is it setting up their UEI, like what types of things do you do for those businesses?
It's a great question, and we're certainly happy to help companies do what I kind of call tactical things that just getting started in the federal side, everything from the UEI to their cage code, to understanding how to navigate sam.gov. When is the appropriate time to jump in with one of the large information aggregators like GovWin or GovTribe or EasyGovOps, and again, and all those are great tools. But when you're starting up, especially if you're bootstrapping, which most small businesses are doing, you either don't have the bandwidth, or you don't have the revenue to use those things, or you're appropriately driving your revenue back into building up your business. And we can help you navigate that to where you can grow your business and not, as you and I are fond of saying, not get ahead of the revenue stream. That's always a tough one to do, and we learned that from a guy who taught us over and over again that, hey, the worst thing you can do is tell me that we've gotten in front of the revenue stream, and I appreciate that life lesson from him. So that's in a nutshell. We bill ourselves as an advisory service, and that's what we do. But advised, it is really, it is a menu or a mosaic of things that we'll provide. But again, what we really want to make sure is that you're set for success.
Great. So in the past, right, the other companies that you've worked with, now CMMC is pretty new. There's always been DFARS requirements and the requirement to comply with the NIST 800-171 controls. But as it relates to some of these smaller businesses, prior to kind of CMMC being 100% on board, what was your sense for the level of, I would say, attention paid to cybersecurity and kind of related issues? Do you think that CMMC has really started to get even some of the smaller contractors that are looking to do business within the DoD kind of taking it much more seriously?
So again, great question, and how you kind of look at this is, I think if you start from why CMMC occurred, and then work your way through kind of the history of CMMC, you'll see where the need was. So for those who don't know, CMMC stands for Cyber Maturity Model Certification, and it's a framework. And it was started by the Department of Defense, but it's being slowly but surely latched on by other federal agencies. But it was a real attempt to do a deep dive into the requirements for cybersecurity for the defense industrial base. And you'll hear a lot of talk about the defense industrial base, but it's a really simple concept. It's everybody who supplies the federal government, and it's everything from, folks like to think of big things as part of the defense industrial base, like planes and boats, ships, etc. But it really gets down to even some of the smaller things, from uniforms to food service, and all those are critical to the needs of the Department of Defense. And what the Department of Defense wanted to make sure of is that, again, even down to unclassified information, because there's a lot that can be gleaned by, foreign enemies on unclassified information. Everybody knows that we have to protect classified information. That's not a hard one, but it's the unclass piece that folks had not paid attention to in the past. And so this was the first attempt, and I'm talking about CMMC 1. This was really the first attempt to reduce cybersecurity risk within the defense supply chain. So before CMMC came along, we had the self-attestation, hard thing to say, under the DFARS, and it really relied on what was called the NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology, special purpose publication that talked about 800-171. A lot of times you'll hear just folks call it by its acronym, NIST 800-171, and that just outlined security requirements for protecting, CUI in non-federal systems and organizations. So think of the folks selling to the government. This is what you had to do. And it was just really about best practices. It was based on self-certification, but that really was not a consistent standard. So one person could read the NIST 800-171 rather, and make a self-attestation that would not hold water with another organization. And so with CMMC, the attempt was to really codify that into, or level set that into, one standard. And so now you've got a framework. Well, that first attempt was started back in about 2019. It was talked about in 2018. It got going in 2019, and then it fell off. And it fell off for a number of reasons, which we don't really need to get into, other than the fact that folks wanted to get it right. And so that meant that there was a lot of review and a lot of changes. And that brings us to 2021, where we get what's being referred to as CMMC 2.0. And that's where we provided a simplified framework, which, reduced the requirement, but it also level set for, the folks that are in part of the DIB. The last thing I'll say about that was, when CMMC was first envisioned, it was 5 levels with varying degrees of difficulty to, attain certification. What CMMC 2.0 has done is reduce that down to 2 levels. And again, still not an easy process, but it's a process that allows small businesses not to have to invest a huge sum to get certified and be able to do business with the federal government, which I think is a great idea.
Yeah. And I think that's critical, right? Because I happen to agree that there are probably circumstances where, the auditing process now managed, as you know, by the C3PAOs, who are kind of those designated auditors for CMMC level 2 and 3, where required. But that auditing piece is really important because if you look at the past, like I've read articles, there was, I think it was a submarine manufacturer in New Jersey that was building a new type of, or it was actually munitions manufacturer, building a new type of torpedo for the Navy, and they got hacked, and they had the plans on their system, and people took it. And there's probably many other examples like that where, we understand the importance of small businesses in terms of innovation and being able to provide capacity for these DoD programs. But that hole really that CMMC tried to fill, where I think you kind of hit on the difference between kind of DFARS and CMMC. Really, CMMC tried to hit is like, how do we bring these guys into the defense industrial base in a way that allows us to protect our critical assets, but also take advantage of the innovation and the other benefits that come from that, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that struck me is I remember the original 5 levels were basically all had to be certified. And so when you think about the expense, not only of implementing the controls, but paying for an audit, addressing any deficiencies in the audit, it seems to me like that could really impact, innovation and capacity. Is like, there might be some other things in there, but those are the 2 things that come to my mind first. Really could impact the innovation capacity in the base and what, how we bring these new technologies to bear to solve some of the problems that are kind of mission critical.
Absolutely.
And so we've talked about, kind of CMMC, and obviously it's evolved a lot in the last 5 years. And as you said, it kind of fell off and kind of came back on. We're now at a place where it's implemented. My interpretation is that we're probably, as things actually start happening, we're probably going to see a lot of changes to CMMC as we learn more about what the impact may be. Do you have any thoughts about like what that next step looks like? We've kind of gotten from 5 to 3 and simplified it, made it much more affordable in terms of compliance. But what do you think kind of that next step might look like as it relates to CMMC?
So you hit on a couple of things that I think are really important to think about as we go into this process. And I'll go back to your example of the company. I think it was in New Jersey where there was a breach. It was unclassified information, but it was a breach, and the next thing you know, plans are ending up in places that we don't want. And so, as the world develops, everything from AI and the speed of the internet has just really evolved 10x. It becomes that much easier for bad actors to go in, find information, and then do things with it that we don't want done, that really degrade our national security. And so we ask, kind of what's next, what's happening. Well, if you look at the original CMMC, and I'm talking about the 2019, and then you move into CMMC 2.0, there was going to be a really graduated scale as to what contracts required implementation. I believe and I'll ask you not to hold me to this number, but I believe initially the thought process was that only about a really small percentage, and rather than put a number, I'll say a small percentage of annual contracts, new contracts, were being let with the CMMC requirement. Well, as we move forward on CMMC and we move forward securing the defense industrial base, again, the DIB, that requirement has gotten a lot more important. And so I say all that to say, I believe that what we're going to start to see is, rather than this slow rollout of CMMC requirements into both new contracts and existing contracts, that's going to pick up a lot of speed. And so contracts that folks in the past, and again, opportunities to work with Department of Defense, that in the past, folks might have thought, well, yeah, eventually we need to get to some kind of standard. Well, that's not really going to be an option anymore, because again, you're a great example. I can also think of an example with on the F-35 where there was a company that was doing accounting for the F-35. Okay, not a, kind of innocuous in a lot of people's minds, but they were breached. But and by breaching, they were able to again see where the different components were coming from for the F-35, and again now we've got data out there that was really unclassified that nobody thought was a real issue. That's a real issue. So my thought is the speed in which current opportunities as well as renewals, recompetes, uh, are going to require CMMC certification is going to go up exponentially. And so now that's the world we're living in, where CMMC becomes the same as, do you have a cage code? Do you have a UEI? It will be that ubiquitous. And so companies need to prepare for that if they want to be in that space.
Yeah, and you brought up an interesting point, right? Because I think the other part of this, and I've heard this, I don't know if that's still kind of current thinking, but at one point the idea was that yes, CMMC will start with the DoD and the Department of Defense and those types of projects, but gradually will expand to other parts of the federal government because even if it's not defense related, there's a lot of other sensitive data out there to protect.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And you just think about it. I mean, there's not a government agency that doesn't have some data that I'm again, I'm not picking on any particular agency, but I can think of 10 examples for Department of Agriculture. I can certainly think of 100 examples within uh, the Homeland Security, Commerce, even Interior, because again, all those agencies touch the economic ecosystem of the U.S. and they've got data out there that bad actors want to get their hands on. And if you're not putting controls into place to keep that from happening, it becomes a real problem, and it strikes at our competitiveness as a nation.
yeah, and I think that the other thing that's important too is you think about it, right? So a lot of services that some of these, even these smaller businesses provide, are relevant across the government. And so now, like if I want to provide something to the IRS, I have IRS publication 4812, and then I have CMMC, and then before you know it, I have 5 or 6 different regulations with which I have to comply. And most of them are the same, but there's always going to be subtle differences, and then you still have to prove compliance with those specific ones. So I think there's a lot of utility in that thinking where we get to the standardized model that kind of covers working with the government in general, right? And reduces that regulatory burden so that we can really unlock the power of these small businesses, because these businesses that you help, in my opinion, they're not only critical to national security, they're critical to success for all the social programs
Right.
and all the other programs that the government offers. Like we need to have more of these companies involved to bring that capacity and innovation, as I kind of talked about before. So yeah, I think those are really, really great points. So we've talked about kind of the evolution to CMMC and kind of where we are. Yeah, what do you think will be the biggest impact? I mean, I think a lot of the concern was, and I noticed this as they were going through kind of the discussions about CMMC. Like, do you think this will really dissuade people from getting involved? Like, they did try to make it innocuous, but I think a lot of people don't think of security as something they want to spend money on, right? It's not like it's not driving the bottom line,
Right.
right? It's a cost driver. It's not a
Right.
revenue
Right.
driver.
Right.
So like, do you think that there's concerns that even though they've kind of simplified it and made it a little bit more bearable, that there still will be, some small businesses that could be critical that may decide just, hey, it's not worth the effort?
Absolutely. And again, we're talking to companies all the time, who are, really asking the question, I like to use the term, is the itch worth the scratch? And
Hmm.
and part of the reason I think it's really important that folks understand this, as CMMC developed and they developed the auditing ecosystem, and then the ecosystem for auditing the auditors, etc. Uh, a lot of costs got bolted onto that, and a lot of those costs were legitimate. There's absolutely some strong actors out there that had legitimate costs that made sense, and but there were a lot that really kind of to use the old term, gilded the lily, and put some really expensive cost out there. And they did it because the market would bear it. Folks who wanted to be part of this system, again, were convinced, hey, I got to spend well into five figures, in some cases even higher than that, which again
Right.
is insane. And that really goes against the intent of the CMMC rollout. The intent was a low cost method to ensure that we're being good stewards of our data at the contractor level. And again, the original intent was, hey, small business, you can do it yourself. We got away from that from CMMC 1.0. Then we got back to that as part 2.0. And again, I don't think there was any ill intentions on that piece, but I just think as this developed and matured, the understanding was there are things that businesses can do on their own, but there's also some things that they probably should not do on their own, just to ensure that things are double checked. So my kind of final answer on that is the requirement is there. There are cost effective methods to get yourself set. Part of it can be self attestation. No issues with that. But I'll use myself as an example. I I have, I write checks and maintain part of my books, myself, but I also have an accountant, and I go to the accountant to make sure that things are done properly, so that I don't run afoul of something else down the road. And I do it in a manner to where it doesn't break the bank, doesn't get ahead of the revenue curve. And I think that there's good companies out there that can do that. I'm talking to one right now that can do that and help you stay in front of your revenue curve and be compliant and be competitive. The other thing that I'd add, and it is kind of related, but I want to, but it's important that you add that the primes are going to be responsible for their subs on this. And I don't think a lot of folks are paying attention to that as much as they should. And so the primes are going to start asking, you know, are you CMMC certified, level one certified, level two, level three? It depends based off of the work that you're doing. If you want to make yourself more attracted to the primes, you're gonna absolutely have to do this. I think a lot of folks think in terms of, hey, if I'm not going after a prime contract, I don't really need to do, all of this. Well, absolutely you need to do all of this, because the primes have now got to ask you, and they've got to verify. It's not even an ask, it's a verification that you are certified the way that you say you're certified. And again, all that goes to help secure the supply chain, which is again, that's the root problem that's being solved by doing this. And if you're not seeing that, then talk to us, because we'll walk you through why this is important. But again, I can't emphasize enough. You've got to do it. You got to do it now. The waiting period is over. There was a legitimate waiting period starting back in 2019, no doubt. But the waiting period's over now, so you got to get moving, and you've got to find solid actors that are doing this for you at a reasonable price within your budget, and they're out there. But again, that requires a little homework on your part.
Yeah, I think you brought up an interesting point, right? Is that we a lot of times businesses think of cybersecurity, they think about their own cybersecurity. They don't necessarily think about the vendors that they work with. And when you look at the CMMC requirements and what's in scope and what's out of scope, they're actually now requiring you to look at, essentially any vendor that's going to have this controlled unclassified information, or, CUI, you might hear that term kind of tossed around a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody that's going to touch that also has to be confirmed. It doesn't matter whether or not the contract that they have is directly with, somebody in the DoD, or whether it's through as a subcontractor. And it isn't restricted to just the big primes. It's any company that has a subcontractor that will be responsible for that. And so, managing those things with flow downs and making sure that you're doing reviews and audits is going to be really important, because, it's not just, a national security issue, obviously, protecting that critical information. But the other part of this is, the impact to your business in the event that something happens and you were really not, living up to the requirements of CMMC, or worse, because one of your subsidiaries or your partners or vendors were not, right? And so it really behooves you to kind of pay attention to all that.
Hey, Rob, you as you were talking about that, I thought back to, and I'm going to try to do this as delicately as possible. There was a rollout about about 10, 12 years ago of a major government program. I'm not going to name the program, but it had to do with healthcare. I'll say that. And when it was rolled out, not well, crashed. The prime had subcontracted all that, pretty much the entire rollout work, to the sub. And my point is that prime got excoriated when this thing crashed. The sub certainly took a beating, but the prime took a serious beating. And when I say beating, I mean it drove stock prices down. I am sure folks were asked to do other things, not within the company. And the point is, that's the same way you've got to look at CMMC. Especially if you're a prime, but it's just as important if you're a mid or a small and you want to do business with the primes, because again, that's a smart thing to do. It's lucrative. It's a great way to grow. But all you have to do is be found in violation of one of the controls, or not properly, set yourself up for one of the controls in CMMC, and that, the reverberating effect of that is significant. And again, I'm not sure in the times that folks are spending doing, all the other things to run a business, that they're thinking about that. So again, I think you made a really great point. This can come back to bite you if you're not careful.
Yeah, and that's important. I think the other thing too is, right, we often talk about cybersecurity as it relates to government, but there's also a lot of other industries that, again, similarly have different requirements and different things to, I think, kind of work around, particularly if you're a smaller business and you're trying to figure out how to kind of do that. I mean, do you think that, CMMC could possibly set a precedent where we have maybe this just kind of, maybe create a little bit more standardization, so that if you're a small business, you can comply with these requirements, and that will put you in a position to do business with banking or with other financial services or with the government? I mean, it seems like there's a way to really help these small businesses, in that way. So, because again, the compliance costs, just the compliance piece, aside from the controls and all the things you actually have to do, that can get really expensive just demonstrating compliance.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on it, the heart of it. We talk a lot about revenue, and the fact that companies, obviously that's the lifeblood of the company. They've got to keep generating that. But that's also, if you're compliant, if you are, ahead of the curve on compliance, and you've also demonstrated that you're not doing exorbitant things to get compliant, then yeah, you're obviously much more attracted. You're more attracted to the primes if you're trying to sub, because you become the low cost alternative. If you're talking to financial institutions looking for funding, again, you've clearly demonstrated that you've been a good steward of the money. You're not going to spend for the gold plated stuff before you got the gold. That's super important. But there's one other thing that a lot of times folks don't think about, which is, and myself included, but it's super important. As you're trying to get all this done, you're expending probably your most valuable commodity, which is time. And if you're wasting a lot of time, or you're having to do a lot of back and forth with companies to get yourself certified or maintain your certification, that's time not spent on building your business, not building your brand. And so you really want to you want to be able to leave yourself the opportunity to do that without breaking the bank. So I think all of that is going to make, a small company, it's certainly going to make a small company competitive. It's going to make a mid-tier company that much more competitive. The large primes are always going to be the large primes. They've got this built into the cake. They've got it built into the bid. But I would also tell you that, because they've got it built into the bid, that keeps, their competitive range fairly narrow. And again, so they're also looking for ways to bring down these costs. And so again, if they can bring in subcontractors that do not have to bolt on a large extra cost just to maintain CMMC certification or other things, that makes you much more attractive, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing too is, so we're getting kind of close to the end here, so I want to make sure we get a couple of these questions in here.
Sure.
Again, I appreciate your time. I know it's valuable. So if you had anything you could say to, like, I'm a small business owner. I want to start working with the DoD. I have something that I think could really make a difference, but I'm a little concerned about these requirements. Like, what kind of advice would you give me to start thinking about how I might move towards compliance, or how it would, what are some things I could do? Are there some basic things I could implement that start me down that path? What would you kind of suggest to these small businesses that want to get into this space, but maybe you're a little bit concerned about being compliant?
Yeah, so it's an important question, because that's probably the rub for a lot of small businesses, and you had alluded to it earlier, where they look at it and they kind of see a wall, and they decide, the wall's too high, bricks too thick, you name it. So I'm just gonna, I'm gonna walk away from it and not do it. And I think, to answer the first part of your question, is, well, the things you can think about to do is, I encourage everybody to go to the CMMC website and just read about the basic requirements and have a basic understanding of what the requirements are. And the second thing I really encourage them to do is not, reach out to the first company that says, hey, we can get you CMMC certified, and it's only going to cost you five figures. And you say to yourself, well, that seems reasonable, so I'll go with it. Probably is probably not reasonable. Two, the marketplace is such now that the opportunity to drive that cost down is significant, and get the same level of quality is significant. So don't don't go to the first offer that comes out there. And there's a lot of good companies out there that do offer, what I would call, solid, upscale, super boutique kind of service, but that may not be where you are right now as a small
Yeah.
business. And I'd argue that you probably won't be. And probably the third thing that I would, ask companies to do is look at the opportunities that you want to go after, within your skill set, and ask yourself two questions. Is there a CMMC requirement now? And is there going to be a CMMC requirement in the future? And both are important because the now is obvious. Then you have to get it if you want to be in that space. But what a lot of companies are not considering is the fact that I win the work today, but tomorrow, I'll worry about that when it comes. Well, it could come a lot faster than you think. The cycle, of having long, 5, 6 year contracts, that's really kind of coming to, I believe, is kind of coming to an end. And we're seeing a lot of contracts now that are base plus one, base plus two rather, and then it's being rolled into, some kind of large IDIQ, and those are really kind of year to year, and the requirements can change from year to year. So, one, take a look at your budget, see what see what you can afford, see what you want to afford, and then make sure that matches up with the level of service that you require for the work that you're doing. And don't think of it only in terms of priming. Think of it in terms of subbing, because again, both of those the requirements are going to be there for both of those levels. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does, and I think you brought up a really incredibly important point. And I don't remember the percentages offhand, but it's something like 70% of contractors that want to do business with the DoD are only going to require certification at level 1. And level 1 certification is literally 17 security practices across 6 control families. They're not super onerous, and so understanding which level you need to be compliant at, leveraging those free resources that the DoD provides to help understand that's really the first step. Because I do see this now where people just they say CMMC compliance and they say 10 grand, but they're not thinking about, well, wait a minute, I'm not going to be holding CUI. I'm only going to be holding FCI, which is the federal contracting information, right? And so the point that you made about understanding what you actually need, I think, is a critical first step, because that's going to help you figure out with whom you want to engage, or even if you need to. There's a lot of free resources to understand how you can do some of these basic security controls yourself.
Yep.
Look on YouTube. I mean, they're not all good, but there are a lot of really good ones out there.
Right.
Right.
No, but
Locking yourself in a Faraday cage, probably not going to help you,
absolutely.
But yeah, so that point that you brought up, I think about, really understanding what you actually need before you start kind of exploring is important, because it'll save you a lot of hassle if you recognize, hey, I only need to be level 1 compliant. It's self-assessment. These are the 17 things that I need to have in place. And if I do that, I'm good to go. And a lot of those things, again, pretty straightforward stuff if you actually look at it. There's compliance lists and things online, and there's a lot of companies that provide this checklist for you, but you can get them right from the source too. So that's great.
No, hey, Rob, you said something that reminded me that I wanted to say, which is, while it varies in the timing of the requirement, whether it's an annual requirement at different levels, or whether it's biannual or every 3 years. But here's the thing to consider: one, regardless, it's always going to cost money, so you need to start factoring that in. And two, it's just like anything else. Let's take the dentist for instance. You want to get an annual checkup just to make sure things are not going sideways. You don't want to come in and find out at your 3 year checkup, hey, you're going to need 4 root canals,
Yeah.
and a cap, and not only from a cost standpoint, but just from a pain level standpoint, you don't want to be there. And again, you've got to factor that in to who you do business with. So if you can get the same level of service for $1,000 a year, that ensures that you stay compliant from year to year, or you just pay somebody $25,000 every 3 years, again, what's the better deal? Well, from where I sit, because again, I'm cheap, and I had it beat into me by a guy that said, "Do not get ahead of the revenue curve." Hey, I I'm going to go with, hey, I'm going to spend the 1,000 every year, just to make sure that I don't have any surprises when the real, either when the real deal comes up or when there's a requirement. Because again, the
Yeah.
primes might come back to you and say, oh yeah, I know that she got certified in, you know, 2 years ago, but that's not good enough for us because we can't be sure that you are who you say you are. So we need something a little more recent. And again, if you're not planning on that and you're not keeping that cost down, it gets to be really hard.
Yeah, you brought up such an important point there because at the end of the day, look, security is a moving target. There's constantly new threats. Your business is going to change. You're going to add you know, new data, which requires different levels of protection. You're going to add applications. You're going to add people, and all these things are potential risks that you really have to kind of stay on top of. Because what you don't want to do is say, all right, I'm just going to do this once and then wait until somebody, asks me again and then have to do it all over again, when there's ways to actually kind of manage that. So it becomes a constant exercise of staying compliant. Part of that you manage through your system security plan, your SSP. But there's many other ways to do that. So, again, that's all really insightful, and I think super helpful, hopefully to the people that are listening. So I know we're at time. So I didn't know, Chip, if you had anything else you wanted to kind of talk about, anything you wanted to plug in terms of things that you're working on right now. Um,
Yeah. So yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun, and
yeah,
again, it was good to sit and chat with you again, and just kind of,
yeah,
you know, we secretly told old war stories. So some folks will have to figure out what that means, but I'm
yeah.
certainly not gonna give it away. In terms of things we're working on, obviously we're making sure that we continue to help folks in the procurement and compliance space. We're really seeing some nice trends out there in terms of, in spite of all that you see on the news and the churn that's going out there, things are still running and things are still happening, and folks need to be prepared for it. And we're certainly ready to help. One of the other things that we're spending time is working, and maybe we'll jump on another call here soon and talk about other transactional authorities or OTAs. It goes by a couple of different names, consortiums, etc. But we've been doing work with a couple of consortiums to help, again, help companies get into the system. What I'd leave you with when it comes to consortiums, it's one of the lowest barriers to entry into federal contracting, and particularly in the Department of Defense. But there are a lot of requirements to get you there and make you a viable candidate for opportunities, or to bring new solutions to the federal, to the Department of Defense. In most cases, what we're working on, and it takes more than just a kind of a simple read. It's a little bit deeper than that. So we'd like to, obviously, would like the opportunity to help folks do that. And if there's any interest in that, our website is www.vfeds, for my old Army buddies out there. That's Victor Foxtrot Echo Delta Sierra.com. And just reach out to us. We absolutely love to talk to folks. It costs you nothing to talk. And again, we'd like to be as helpful as our team would like to be as helpful as possible, because at the end of the day, we want to help the mission. We want to help Department of Defense. That's where our heart is. We want to help the Department of Defense. Be better, be safer, and be good stewards of our nation's treasures. And that's not just money. That's our sons and daughters that are out there serving in faraway places. So again, Rob, thanks for the opportunity to join you today. I look forward to the next time. And if I can help on anything, let me know.
Yeah, no, we'll absolutely have to do this again, and I'll make sure that Chip's website, all his information is in the comment section or the description section, so you can reach out to him there. If you find this content valuable, there's going to be a lot more like it. Definitely want to have Chip on again. We have a lot of great people that are kind of coming in and willing to talk, and share their expertise. So if you find it valuable, please go ahead and subscribe, kind of follow us on all the major podcasting platforms as we kind of put new stuff out. And again, Chip, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And everybody else, hope we'll see you again next time.